Don Quixote couldn't spot anything suspicious. He hadn't even laid eyes on Dulcinea, and she didn't know him from Adam. But Don Quixote thought that was the beauty of it all. Madness strikes for no reason. He wanted to show his lady that even fantasies could be this intense, making reality seem even more incredible. Of course, Don Quixote had a legitimate reason too. Why go mad? Because he has not seen his beloved for a long time, hasn't even seen her once. So he missed her so much that he went crazy, and now it was time for him to go mad, and he will keep at it. He will write a heartfelt letter to Dulcinea and demand Sancho will ride his skinny horse and deliver it. He also asked Sancho to bring back a letter in reply too, and that'll be the cure for his madness. Believe it or not, Don Quixote's reasoning was sound. He said to Sancho, if Dulcinea's reply does right by my undying loyalty, my madness will fade, along with the penance and suffering. If not, I'll truly go mad, and a man of true madness won't feel any pain, so no matter what the reply is, the pain endured by Sir Don Quixote will be lifted. See, that's pretty logical, so Don Quixote chose a spot in these high mountains as his base for penance and self-redemption. There was a stream running through it, and when he saw it, he went bonkers and exclaimed, God, I've found the spot to wail about my woes. My tears will flood this stream, my sighs will blow the forest leaves restlessly. Oh, my poor heart, separated from my eternal love for so long, is tormented and suspicious. And you, Sancho my squire, every move I make here is for my lady, remember that and tell her. Sancho saw all this and replied to his master, I've seen it all, what else is there to see? Don Quixote said, seeing isn't everything. Now, watch me strip off my clothes, toss my armor around, and bang my head against a rock. Sancho said, heavens, for God's sake, watch out when you're banging your head against a rock. Who knows, that rock might have a sharp edge, and one hit could be the end of you. Anyway, this whole act of yours is fake. If you must bang something, hit the water or some cotton. Seeing all this, I think Sancho is getting mean. Anyway, Don Quixote restrained himself a bit and listened to advice. He wrote a letter to his lady and then really stripped himself, did a headstand to show Sancho he was going mad, and sent Sancho off with the letter. Halfway there, Sancho met two of Don Quixote's friends, the book burners, the priest and the barber. Sancho explained the situation, and the priest said, what should we do? We've got to help this madman. He gave Sancho an idea, and what happened next? Sancho ran back to the mountain and found Don Quixote who was going mad. He lied, saying the letter was delivered, and Miss Dulcinea ordered Don Quixote to return to the village to see her. She's waiting for you there. Don Quixote was thrilled, but he said he'd made up his mind to accomplish something first, worthy of her affection, before he could go back to see her. At this moment, a maiden suddenly appeared, part of the priest's scheme. She was dressed in luxurious attire, pretending to be a fabricated princess. The barber friend wore a fake beard made from a cow's tail, acting as her attendant. Together, they approached Don Quixote. The princess said, a giant has usurped my kingdom. I beg the great knight Don Quixote to uphold justice, to duel the giant and reclaim my realm. This perfectly aligned with Don Quixote's desires. He had always hoped for such a legend to manifest in his own life. Without hesitation, he agreed. He followed the maiden back to an inn, where everyone was prepared to play their parts in this grand spectacle. Don Quixote fulfilled the dream of knighthood, and the maiden found her beloved, no longer willing to play the role of a princess. Next, while Don Quixote slept, they bound him and placed him in a cage on an ox cart, all faces hidden. When Don Quixote woke, he couldn't recognize anyone around him. True to his consistent logic, this must surely be another enchantment by magicians. I am under a spell, unable to resist. The mischievous barber friend then, in a chilling voice, made a prophecy, knight with the mournful face. The Biscayan and Don Quixote were trading insults, escalating their anger. Don Quixote drew his sword and lunged at the Biscayan. The man was riding a hired mule, a cantankerous beast with a bad temper. Seeing Don Quixote charging towards him, he didn't even bother to change a mount. In the heat of the moment, he grabbed a cushion from a nearby carriage and used it as a shield. Don Quixote spurred his horse and charged forward, while the Biscayan also tried to charge back. Unfortunately, the mule he was riding wasn't cut out for this sort of thing. It had already traveled a long way and was utterly exhausted. The mule refused to budge an inch, standing there motionless, watching Don Quixote charge towards him. Both men raised their swords high, aiming to cleave each other in two. The Biscayan struck first with a powerful blow, driven by rage, but his aim was off. The sword slashed across Don Quixote's left shoulder, cutting through half of his armor, along with a chunk of his helmet and half an ear. Had fate not intervened, this might have been the end of our valiant knight's adventurous life. Enraged beyond measure, Don Quixote sat upright in his saddle again, raised both hands high, and brought his sword down towards the Biscayan's head. The man, using the shield actually a cushion from the nearby carriage to defend himself, but it was futile. Poor Biscayan's head collapsed under the impact, blood gushing from his nose, mouth, and ears as he fell heavily to the ground. This is one of the rare victories of the valiant Don Quixote, which sounds quite comical, but regardless, Don Quixote thought to himself that he had won after all, enough to boast about for a year or more. From then on, Don Quixote continued his wild escapades. One moment he was charging at flocks of sheep, the next he was releasing prisoners from their captors. Unfortunately, luck wasn't always on his side. 9 times out of 10, he deserved the misfortunes that befell him. Sometimes he accidentally killed someone's sheep and got several teeth knocked out by the angry shepherd. And sometimes he freed the prisoners, only to get a beating from them and have his clothes robbed. Sancho Panza suffered along with him. Eventually, Sancho didn't want to be his squire anymore. He had hoped to become a governor of an island by following Don Quixote, but now he was often getting beaten up, rolled in blankets and tossed up and down for fun, and even had his beloved donkey stolen. When people curiously asked, "What are you two up to?" they would reply, "We're adventurous knights." "What's that?" they'd ask. Sancho would answer on behalf of his master, "You really don't know? Let me tell you. An adventurous knight is someone who gets beaten one day and is made a king the next. Today they're the unluckiest and poorest in the world, tomorrow they're handing out 2 or 3 crowns to their attendants." Sancho also introduced his master to others, saying, "This brave soul is the famous Don Quixote de la Mancha, a knight with a mournful face." Don Quixote asked him, "Why do you say that?" Sancho replied, "Because you fight until you're exhausted, lose teeth, and look all bedraggled like you're mourning." Don Quixote didn't get mad when he heard this. He was actually really happy. See, in those knight novels, all the knights have nicknames, like Rocket Knight or Phoenix Knight. So, the mournful knight seemed like a good nickname to him. He figured that if someone ever writes a great biography about him someday, maybe they'll just pick that name out of thin air, sort of a psychic connection, you know? So, right then and there, he told Sancho about it. It's not like Sancho made it up or anything, it was destiny. So our naive knight-errant decided to embrace the nickname and, like all knights do, he painted that mournful face right onto his shield. And from then on, that's how his shield looked, just a big old mournful face. You hear this and think, what a bunch of nonsense. Yes, that's what Cervantes did to mock the popular knight novels of his time, satirizing those unrealistic and overly serious absurd stories. What other ridiculous antics did Don Quixote get up to? There's an interesting part where he writes that Don Quixote and Sancho came to a mountain and suddenly had the urge to imitate the great knights Amadis and rolled in by going mad for their lady loves. Yes, that's how the book puts it. Those knights, because they were scorned by their loves, retreated to the mountains to do penance. Then there were some knights who uprooted trees, committed murder and arson, and dragged away mares backwards, all because of love wounds. Don Quixote decided he wanted to emulate them, but Sancho quickly intervened, saying, "I reckon knights who do such things must have a reason, usually some kind of trigger that makes them go bonkers and suffer through hardships." What's your reason for going mad?